What you are about to hear could rewrite all human history. For nearly 13,000 years, this incredible global mystery has baffled humanity. Newly discovered evidence reveals a terrifying cataclysm wiped out our world. This shocking truth was hidden for thousands of years, until now. What if a lost global civilization vanished in this ancient event? Stay with us to uncover this incredible forgotten chapter of history. Deep within humanity's memory lies an ancient story, a scar etched upon our very being. It tells of a world submerged, not by tides but a global deluge. Continents vanished, mountain peaks obscured, and civilizations erased from time. Mountain peaks obscured, and civilizations erased from time. Before history, this memory was a whispered secret, carved into stone reliefs. It was transmitted through generations in 1,000 different languages and cultures. Heroes shift, divine figures differ, but the terrifying core narrative remains consistent. How can this be? What cataclysmic event marked our species' soul? Many instantly recall the story of Noah, a pillar of Abrahamic tradition. This narrative carries profound moral and spiritual weight for countless believers. Humanity's widespread corruption led its creator to a grim decision. The world would be purified through an all-encompassing, devastating deluge. Yet one righteous man, Noah, received divine instruction to build an ark, a colossal vessel of impossible scale to shelter his family and creatures. Then the heavens unleashed fury, 40 days and 40 nights of rain. Subterranean springs erupted. Every hill beneath the heavens vanished. For 150 days, floodwaters dominated the entire earth. The deluge finally receded. The ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. From Noah's family and preserved creatures, the world was repopulated. It seems a potent, singular narrative, an event of immense magnitude, an event that feels as though it could only transpire once, never again. But what if it wasn't? What if Noah's story, ancient as it appears, was merely one iteration of a tale that had been recounted for millennia before his name was ever committed to writing? Let us journey far back in time, to the very cradle of civilization itself, to the sun-baked plains of ancient Mesopotamia, the land nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians meticulously inscribed their narratives onto clay tablets, employing a script known as cuneiform. Among the myriad tablets unearthed from the desert sands, we discovered one of humanity's oldest literary masterpieces, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Within this grand saga of kings and monstrous beings, we encounter a hero driven by a quest for immortality. His odyssey leads him to a mysterious ancient figure named Utnapishtim, the sole survivor of a great flood. As Utnapishtim begins to speak, the parallels to Noah's account prove both staggering and irrefutable. He reveals to Gilgamesh that the gods, led by the volatile Enlil, conspired to obliterate humankind because their incessant clamor disturbed divine repose. However, Ea, the god of wisdom, covertly warned Utnapishtim, instructing him to dismantle his dwelling and construct an immense vessel. Precise dimensions were provided. He was commanded to bring aboard the seed of all living things, alongside his family and skilled artisans. The ensuing tempest was terrifying, a maelstrom of wind and rain that raged for 6 days and 7 nights, so violent that even the gods themselves recoiled in fear from its power. Once the storm abated, Utnapishtim's boat settled upon the peak of Mount Nisir. To ascertain if the waters had subsided, he released a dove, then a swallow, and finally a raven. When the raven did not return, he understood it was safe to disembark and repopulate the earth. The commonalities are too numerous, too precise to be dismissed as mere coincidence. The divine warning, the construction of an immense vessel, the preservation of animal life, the boat's grounding on a mountain, the dispatch of birds. It is fundamentally the same story, recounted in a different language, originating from a much earlier epoch. This revelation alone sent tremors through the fields of history and theology. It intimated that the narrative of the Great Flood was not a unique divine revelation, but rather a persistent tradition, a memory that had been transmitted and reshaped over millennia throughout the Near East. But the echo does not cease there. It intensifies, growing more insistent as we broaden our inquiry. Let us traverse westward across the Mediterranean Sea to the sun-drenched islands of ancient Greece. Here, poets and philosophers did not speak of Noah or Utnapishtim. Instead, they recounted the tale of Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha. Zeus, the king of the gods, became utterly repulsed by humanity's pervasive wickedness during the Iron Age. He resolved to annihilate them with a mighty flood. Yet the Titan Prometheus, who had sculpted man from clay and held affection for his creation, forewarned his son Deucalion. He advised him to construct a wooden chest, a larnax, and provision it for their survival. When Zeus unleashed the floodgates, Deucalion and Pyrrha drifted upon the boundless waters for 9 days and 9 nights. When the deluge finally subsided, their chest came to rest on the high slopes of Mount Parnassus. Alone in a drowned world, an oracle instructed them to repopulate the earth by casting the bones of their mother over their shoulders. Comprehending that their mother was Gaia, the earth itself, and her bones were the scattered rocks, they complied. The stones thrown by Deucalion transformed into men, and those thrown by Pyrrha became women. Thus a new lineage of humans was born. The specific details diverge, colored by the unique palette of Greek mythology. Yet, the fundamental structure remains unaltered: divine wrath, a chosen pair, a means of survival, and the rebirth of humanity from a watery grave. And the echo persists, journeying eastward across continents, over formidable mountain ranges and sprawling plains, to the Indian subcontinents. In ancient Hindu texts, such as the Satapatha Brahmana and the Puranas, we discover the legend of Manu, the first man. One day, as he performed his ritual ablutions, a tiny fish swam into his cupped hands. The say yui sarisen suplaka blamingen soten swam. Weeswan trumoset. The fish, a divine being in disguise, implored Manu to save it. Manu, filled with compassion, harbored the fish, transferring it to progressively larger vessels as it grew, until it became a giant, at which point he released it into the ocean. Before its departure, the fish revealed itself as Matsya, an avatar of the god Vishnu, and warned Manu of an impending, world-ending flood. He instructed Manu to construct a vast ship and to embark with his family, the seeds of all plants, and the 7 great sages, Sapta Rishi. When the flood arrived, Manu tethered his ship to the horn of the colossal fish, which then guided the vessel safely through the cosmic waters until it came to rest upon a high mountain in the Himalayas. Once the waters receded, Manu performed a sacred ceremony from which a woman named Ida was born. Together they became the progenitors of the new human race. Again and again the pattern emerges, from the Fertile Crescent to the Aegean Sea to the towering peaks of the Himalayas. The memory is preserved, but it does not cease there. It traverses oceans that were considered impassable by the ancient world. In the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, the Aztec people recounted the story of a couple named Tata and Nena. The god Titlahuan warned them of a coming flood and instructed them to hollow out a massive cypress log, taking with them only 2 ears of maize. They sealed themselves within and survived the deluge that drowned the world and transformed all other humans into fish. The Mayan Popol Vuh speaks of multiple creations of humanity, the second of which, crafted from wood, was obliterated by a great flood because they had forgotten their creators. From the Cree, the Hopi, and the Iroquois of North America, to the Aboriginal tribes of Australia, from the indigenous peoples of South America, to the ancient myths of China, from Scandinavia to the islands of the Pacific, the story reiterates itself with an uncanny consistency. Approximately 270 cultures worldwide, many with no conceivable means of intercommunication, have each preserved a legend of a time when the world was utterly consumed by water. How can this be? How could so many distinct cultures, separated by thousands of miles and millennia, all narrate the same impossible story? Is it mere coincidence, or is there something more profound at play? To follow that echo back to its source, to answer the question of how this singular, impossible narrative could be known across the entire world, we must travel to the 19th century. For it was then that the first crucial key to this global mystery was unearthed. His name was George Smith, a self-taught genius. Smith had mastered the exceptionally complex cuneiform script of ancient Assyria and Babylon. His life's ambition was to reassemble the shattered remnants of the royal library of Ashurbanipal, Assyria's last great king. These fragments, thousands of them, had been excavated from the ruins of Nineveh in modern-day Iraq and subsequently shipped to London. Day after day, Smith meticulously cleaned and pieced together these 2,600-year-old tablets, deciphering the sagas of forgotten kings and their long-dead deities. In 1872, while poring over a series of tablets that recounted the story of a legendary hero king named Gilgamesh, he encountered a passage that made his heart pound. The inscribed lines described an immense ship, an impending deluge, and the salvation of all living creatures. As he deciphered further, the details grew clearer and more astonishing. He read of a vessel resting on a mountain, and of a bird released to seek dry land. Smith, a devout man raised on the narratives of the Old Testament, was utterly astounded. He realized, with a shock that must have felt like a lightning strike, that he was reading an account of the Great Flood, a version chillingly similar to the story of Noah in the book of Genesis. The critical distinction: the clay tablet he held in his hands was by any measure vastly older. He had found the story of Noah, but it was written in the wrong language, from the wrong era, and featured a different hero's name. It was a discovery that would forever alter our understanding of history. He had uncovered the tale of Utnapishtim. To fully grasp the story inscribed on that tablet, we must first understand the man who sought it out. Gilgamesh was the king of the mighty city of Uruk, 2/3 god and 1/3 man. A figure of immense power and overwhelming arrogance who oppressed his populace. To curb his hubris, the gods fashioned a companion for him, Enkidu, a wild man from the wilderness. They initially clashed, then forged the deepest of friendships, embarking on epic adventures together. But their defiance of the gods became excessive. As punishment, the gods decreed that Enkidu must perish. Gilgamesh was devastated by the loss of his friend. He held Enkidu's body for 6 days and 7 nights until a maggot emerged from his nose. At that horrifying moment, Gilgamesh confronted not merely grief, but the terrifying absolute finality of death. For the first time, the great king experienced fear. Consumed by this nascent terror, he became obsessed with a singular objective: to discover the secret of eternal life. His quest led him on a perilous journey to the very ends of the earth, through a dark mountain pass, guarded by scorpion men, and across the treacherous waters of death, to find the only man who had ever evaded mortality. He sought the dwelling of Utnapishtim, the man who had survived the Great Flood and been granted immortality by the gods themselves. When Gilgamesh, weary and weathered, finally stood before him, he posed the simple, desperate question: "How did you attain eternal life?" And Utnapishtim, in response, offered no magic spell or secret potion. Instead, he recounted a story, the story of how the world ended. He began, "Let me unveil to you, Gilgamesh, a hidden matter, a secret of the gods. I hail from the city of Shuruppak, a city you know, which lies on the banks of the river Euphrates. The city was ancient, and the gods residing within it collectively resolved in their hearts to unleash a flood. In a clandestine council, the great gods, Anu, the sky father, Ninurta, the warrior, and Enlil, the god of wind and storms, issued their decree. And why? What was humanity's paramount sin? It was not corruption, nor wickedness, nor violence. Utnapishtim explained that humanity had simply grown too numerous, and their incessant clamor had become intolerable to the god Enlil, who could no longer find repose. For being too abundant in life, the world was slated for annihilation. But not all the gods concurred. Ea, the clever god of wisdom and water, was also present at that council. He had sworn an oath with the others not to divulge their plan to any mortal. So he devised a brilliant deception. He approached the reed hut where Utnapishtim slept, and spoke not to the man, but to the very wall of the hut itself. He whispered, reed hut, wall, wall, listen, reed hut, reflect, wall, man of Shuruppak, son of Ubamatutu, tear down your house and build a boat, abandon possessions and seek out life, despise worldly goods and save your soul. Tear down your house, I say, and build a boat. These are the measurements of the boat you shall build. Let her beam be equal to her length, and deck her over like the vault of the heavens. Through this ingenious trick, Ea's warning reached Utnapishtim in what must have felt like a dream. The command was unequivocal. Utnapishtim immediately assembled the elders of his city and, employing a cunning fabrication, told them a lie. He claimed that the god Enlil was incensed with him, and he could no longer reside in the city. He was to construct a magnificent boat and journey down to the Abzu, the freshwater sea, to live with his lord Ea. Upon hearing this, the elders rejoiced, believing that once Utnapishtim was gone, the god Enlil would bestow a bounty of riches upon their city. And so, with the entire city aiding him, construction commenced. The vessel he built was not a sleek ship, but a colossal cube-like barge, an ark engineered for stability, not swift passage. It measured 12 and 20 cubits on each side, featuring a massive roof and 7 decks, each subdivided into 9 compartments. Utnapishtim waterproofed the entire structure, both inside and out, with bitumen and pitch. When it was complete, he loaded his life's accumulated treasures into it. He recounted, I loaded into it all that I had of gold. I loaded into it all that I had of gold. I loaded into it all that I had of gold. I loaded into it all that I had of the seed of all living things. He brought his entire family and kin, the craftsmen of the city who had assisted in the boat's construction, and, as he declared, the beasts of the field, both wild and tame. As the sun set on the appointed day, the signal arrived. The sky began to unleash a terrifying deluge. Utnapishtim sealed the final door, entrusting the navigation of the great vessel to his boatman, Puzur Armorer. The ensuing storm was a cataclysm beyond all comprehension. A black cloud ascended from the horizon, and the thunder god Adad roared within it. The gods of the abyss surged forth, and the gods of the storm transformed daylight into darkness, shattering the land like a clay pot. For 6 days and 7 nights, the wind and the flood waters raged. Utnapishtim recounts to Gilgamesh that the violence was so profound that even the gods themselves were terrified. They fled to the highest heaven of Anu, cowering like dogs, huddled against the outer wall. The goddess Ishtar shrieked like a woman in childbirth, lamenting, How could I have commanded this evil in the council of the gods? I have commanded a battle to destroy my people, but are they not my people? For I brought them forth. On the 7th day the storm abated, the wind grew calm and the sea grew quiet. Utnapishtim opened a hatch and peered out. The world was gone. I looked at the face of the world, he said, and there was silence. All of humanity had returned to clay. The landscape was as flat and featureless as a rooftop. He fell to his knees and wept. His immense boat had come to rest on the peak of Mount Nisea. For 7 days, the vessel remained lodged there. On the 7th day, he resolved to test the waters. Here, the story provides a detail of such specificity that it demands our attention. Utnapishtim stated, I sent forth a dove, and released it. The dove flew away, but returned to me. There was no resting place for it, and she returned. Then I sent forth a swallow. The swallow flew away, but returned to me. There was no resting place for it, and she returned. Finally, I sent forth a raven. The raven flew away, and she saw the waters receding. She found food. She circled. She cawed, and she did not come back to me. Knowing that the land was finally emerging from the waters, Utnapishtim opened the doors of his ark and released all the animals into the new world. He then erected an altar on the mountain peak and offered a sacrifice to the gods. The sweet savor of the roasting meat ascended to the heavens, and the gods, famished and remorseful, gathered like flies around the offering. Just then the great god Enlil, the architect of the flood, arrived. When he beheld the boat and realized that some humans had survived, he was consumed by furious rage. "What living thing has escaped?" he roared. No man was to survive the destruction. It was then that the wise god Ea stepped forward to confront him. He did not deny his role but chastised Enlil for his indiscriminate wrath. "You, the wisest of the gods, the counselor, how could you so senselessly unleash the flood? On the sinner, impose his sin. On the transgressor, impose his transgression. But be merciful, lest he be cut off. Instead of you bringing up the flood, would that a lion had appeared and diminished mankind. Instead of you bringing up the flood, would that a wolf had appeared and diminished mankind. Instead of you bringing up the flood, would that a famine had been set up and the land devastated. It was not I who revealed the secret of the gods. I only let a most wise man see a dream." Humbled by Ea's wisdom, Enlil's anger subsided. He came aboard the great boat, took Utnapishtim and his wife by the hands, and blessed them. He declared, "Hitherto Utnapishtim has been but human. Henceforth Utnapishtim and his wife shall be like us gods. They shall dwell far away at the mouth of the rivers." And that, Utnapishtim explained to a stunned Gilgamesh, was how he came to be immortal. When George Smith deciphered this astounding story, the implications were immediately manifest. He was looking at a blueprint for the story of Noah. The narrative framework is identical: a divine decision to destroy humanity, a warning imparted to a single chosen man, meticulous instructions for building an immense vessel, the collection of animals, a world-destroying flood, the boats landing on a mountain, the utilization of birds to locate dry land, and a sacrifice offered after deliverance. The divergences lie in the theology: the polytheistic, squabbling deities of Mesopotamia versus the singular, omnipotent God of Genesis. The rationale for the flood is a cosmic annoyance in one, a moral judgment in the other. But the sequence of events is so strikingly parallel that it defies mere coincidence. The timeline presents the most damning evidence. The standard version of the Gilgamesh epic was committed to writing around 1200 BCE. However, the story itself is considerably older, with Sumerian fragments dating back to at least 2100 BCE. The Book of Genesis, where the narrative of Noah is found, is estimated by scholars to have been compiled in its final form much later, sometime between the 9th and 6th centuries BCE. This indicates that the Mesopotamian account of the flood predates the Hebrew account by at least 1,000 years, and perhaps closer to 2,000. So how did this transmission occur? Historians point to a pivotal event in the history of the Jewish people: the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE. When the kingdom of Judah was conquered, its elite, its scribes and religious thinkers were forcibly resettled in Babylon, the very heart of the Mesopotamian world. For decades they lived immersed in Babylonian culture, science and literature. They would have undoubtedly encountered the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of that civilization's foundational texts. It is during this period of intense cultural crisis and exchange that many scholars believe the ancient Hebrew traditions were compiled and written down, forming the basis of what would become the Old Testament. It is entirely plausible that the Hebrew scribes, upon hearing this powerful ancient story of a world-purging flood, recognized its potency and adapted it. They repurposed the narrative, stripping it of its polytheistic origins and infusing it with their own monotheistic theology and moral framework. Utnapishtim's survival becomes a reward for obedience and wisdom, while Noah's survival becomes a testament to singular righteousness in a world steeped in sin. The story was not stolen, but transformed, imbued with new meaning for a new people. The discovery on that clay tablet in the British Museum did not dismantle the story of Noah. Rather, it situated it within a far grander, more ancient historical context. It revealed that the Great Flood was not the private memory of a single tradition, but a shared foundational myth of the entire ancient Near East. It proves that the terror and hope embodied in that story resonated so profoundly with our ancestors that it simply had to be told. But it also prompts a new, deeper question. If the Hebrew writers heard the story from the Babylonians, from whom did the Babylonians hear it? Our initial step further back in time brings us to a story known as the Epic of Atrahasis. The name Atrahasis translates to exceedingly wise, and his story is far more than merely a flood narrative. It presents the brutal and pragmatic history of the entire relationship between humanity and its creators. Unlike the Epic of Gilgamesh, which commences with humanity already in existence, the Atrahasis epic begins before we even appeared. It opens in a primordial era when only gods existed. But these were not serene, omnipotent beings. They were structured into a rigid class system. There was a senior echelon of gods, the Anunnaki, who held all power, led by Anu, Enlil, and Enki. And there was a junior, working class of gods, the Igigi. For thousands of years, the Igigi were compelled to perform all the manual labor of the cosmos. Their primary task was immense. They dug out the great riverbeds of the Tigris and Euphrates, piling up mountains of silt on either side. Their work was agonizing, and it was ceaseless. After 40 long periods of this back-breaking toil, the Igigi finally reached their breaking point. They convened a secret council. They spoke of their suffering, and they fomented a rebellion. In the dead of night, they burned their spades and tools, and marched as one to the great temple of their overlord, the chief god Enlil. They encircled his dwelling, enacting a divine labor strike, demanding an end to their servitude. When Enlil awoke to find his temple besieged by his own brethren, he was both terrified and enraged. He summoned a council of the great Anunnaki gods to determine their course of action. It was the wise god Enki, a master of technology and invention, who proposed a solution. Do not punish the rebels, he argued, for their labor is truly too immense. Instead, let us create a lesser being, a substitute to bear the workload for them. Let us create a creature whose entire purpose for existence is to serve the gods and free them from toil. The mother goddess Mami was summoned to execute the task. The plan was both creative and gruesome. One of the gods, Wielu, who was said to possess a rational soul, was sacrificed. His flesh and blood were taken and commingled with clay. From this divine terrestrial mixture, the goddess Mami fashioned the first human beings. The text explicitly states our purpose. We were created to be a race of slaves. The gods celebrated, liberated from their labor, while humanity was put to work digging canals, tilling fields, and providing sustenance for their divine masters. For a time the plan functioned, but the creators had made a critical miscalculation. Humans proved far more fertile than anticipated. Over the course of 1,200 years, our population exploded, and with this population boom came a problem: noise. The land grew wide, the people multiplied, and the din of their existence, their talking, their working, their living, rose to the heavens and shattered the sleep of the god Enlil. This is the very same complaint we encountered in the Gilgamesh epic. But here, in this older narrative, we perceive it as part of a long and escalating conflict. The flood was not Enlil's initial attempt to resolve his noise problem. It was his final, desperate, and most terrible solution. His first attempt involved biological warfare. He presented himself before the divine council and commanded that a plague be unleashed upon the human population. The sickness proliferated, and people began to die in vast numbers. But the hero of our story, Atrahasis, was a favorite of the god Enki. Enki, who had assisted in humanity's creation, felt a certain responsibility, a degree of affection for his invention. He could not openly defy Enlil. But just as he would later do for Utnapishtim, he discovered a loophole. He instructed Atrahasis to lead his people in a new practice. They were to disregard all other gods and construct a temple dedicated solely to Namtar, the god of the plague. They were to offer all their sacrifices directly to him. Flattered by this sudden, exclusive attention, Namtar was shamed into withdrawing his hand, and the plague ceased. Enlil was enraged at being thwarted. Humanity continued to multiply once again. Their clamor again became unbearable. So Enlil decided upon a second strategy, famine. He commanded the rain god, Adad, to withhold the rains, and for the lands to become barren. A devastating drought and famine gripped the world. People grew desperate, resorting to cannibalism to survive. But once again Enki whispered advice to his servant Atrahasis. This time he was to lead the people in worshipping only Adad, the god of rain, and just as before, Adad, embarrassed by the direct praise while the people suffered, released the rains against Enlil's orders. The famine was broken. Now Enlil's fury was absolute. His own divine brethren had twice defied his will. He convened one final binding council. He compelled every single god, including the reluctant Enki, to swear a sacred, unbreakable oath. They would all combine their powers to unleash a great flood that would annihilate humanity once and for all. And this time, no one was to offer any assistance. This context, absent from the Gilgamesh epic, profoundly transforms the narrative. The flood is no longer a singular, almost arbitrary act of divine irritation. It is the culmination of a protracted campaign, a final solution born of repeated frustration and failure. The oath the gods swear is not merely a formality. It is Enlil's method of ensuring his rebellious brother Enki cannot interfere a third time. But Enki, the master of loopholes, found one last avenue. Bound by his oath not to speak to any human, he approached the reed hut of Atrahasis and spoke to the wall, delivering the now familiar warning. The ensuing flood story is a clear precursor to the Utnapishtim version. Atrahasis constructs a boat, loads it with his family and animals, and survives the deluge. When he emerges and offers a sacrifice, the starving gods swarm to the scent of the food, and Enlil discovers he has been tricked yet again. What the Atrahasis epic provides us is the crucial motive. It reinterprets the Great Flood not as a narrative of moral judgment, but as a terrifyingly pragmatic act of population control. A desperate attempt by a frustrated master to exterminate his unruly slaves. Yet, this is still not the ultimate source, for the story of Atrahasis was written in the Akkadian language, and the Akkadians inherited their culture and their myths from an even older, more enigmatic people, who preceded them in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians. When we delve deeper, past the Akkadian tablets, we find the ghost of the original story. We find a name, Ziusudra. Our evidence for Ziusudra is far more fragmented, akin to a magnificent vase shattered into 100 pieces, with most of the fragments missing. One of this culture's most remarkable artifacts is the Sumerian king list. It is a clay tablet that enumerates the succession of kings and the durations of their reigns. But the list possesses a strange characteristic. It details a series of 8 kings who ruled from 5 different cities for an impossibly long period of 200 years. Then, after the reign of the last of these kings, the tablet states simply and chillingly, "Then the flood swept over." Following that line, the king list resumes with kings whose reigns span much more believable human lifespans. For the Sumerians, the flood was not a myth. It was a historical event, a definitive demarcation in their timeline that separated the godlike, almost eternal world of the past from the mortal, fragile world of the present. The story of the man who lived through that dividing line is preserved on a single, badly damaged tablet known as the Eridu Genesis. At least 1/3 of the tablet is entirely lost. What remains is the earliest known version of the Great Flood story. Here the hero is a man named Ziusudra. He is described not merely as a king, but as a humble and pious priest who dedicates his days to reverence, striving to discern the will of the gods through dreams. The decipherable fragments inform us that the gods once again resolved to obliterate humankind, and one god, Enki, once again dissented. In this version, Enki does not address a wall. The text seems to suggest he speaks directly to Ziusudra, standing beside him in a vision, warning him of the impending disaster. He tells him a flood will sweep over the cult centers and destroy the seed of mankind. Ziusudra is instructed to construct a giant boat, though the specifics of its construction are lost in a broken section of the tablet. The storm rages for 7 days and 7 nights. When the sun finally emerges, Ziusudra, the priest-king, drills an opening in the boat and prostrates himself before the sun god Utu. He offers a great sacrifice of oxen and sheep. The conclusion of the story is also fragmented, but it is clear that like Utnapishtim who followed him, Ziusudra is granted eternal life for his piety and is sent to dwell in Dilmun, the land of the rising sun, a paradise at the edge of the world. When we juxtapose these 3 figures, Ziusudra, Atrahasis and Utnapishtim, we observe a story evolving over 2,000 years. Ziusudra is the pious servant of the gods. Atrahasis is the cunning hero, a man who repeatedly outwits a tyrannical deity. Utnapishtim is simply the passive survivor, a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time to receive a warning. But the deeper we delve, the darker the motive becomes. The story of Atrahasis lays bare the foundation of the myth, a foundation not about sin, but about servitude. It presents us with a chilling cosmology. Humanity was created as a biological machine, a tool for labor. When that tool became too numerous and too vociferous, its creator decided to scrap the entire project. The Great Flood, in this original telling, was not a moral reset. It was a factory recall. Enki, our supposed savior, was not acting out of love for humanity, but perhaps out of a creator's pride, unwilling to see his complex work utterly destroyed. This compels us to ask a more profound and unsettling question. What precisely was the noise that so incensed Enlil? Was it merely the sound of a teeming population, or is noise a metaphor for something else? Was it the awakening of human consciousness, of self-awareness, of free will that the gods had not intended for their slave race? Was it the dawn of a new technology or a new mode of thought that was perceived as a threat to the divine order? The myth informs us that our creators attempted to eliminate us with plagues, with famines, and finally with water. It is the story of an ongoing, systematic effort to control or destroy a creation that had transcended its intended purpose. Our journey now leads us westward, out of the ancient river-fed plains of Mesopotamia and into the sun-drenched rocky peninsulas and islands of the Aegean Sea. We transition from the world of the Sumerians and Babylonians to the world of the Greeks. And with this journey, the very essence of the flood story begins to transform. The Mesopotamian memory was a dark and pragmatic one, a tale of capricious gods seeking to control a slave race that had become an annoyance. It was a narrative of cosmic pest control. The Greeks, however, perceived the world through a different lens. Their gods were certainly fickle and often cruel, but they were intertwined with humanity in a far more intimate and philosophical drama. For the Greeks, the Great Flood was not about noise. It was about justice. It was a story about hubris. To comprehend the Greek flood, we must first understand the age in which it was set. The poet Hesiod described the ages of mankind, and the final and most degraded of these was the Iron Age. It was a time of ceaseless toil and misery, when honor and virtue had abandoned the earth. Men became selfish, cruel and violent. Oaths were broken. The sacred bond between guest and host was betrayed, and children dishonored their parents. Justice, the Greeks believed, had forsaken the world, and the gods on Mount Olympus surveyed their creation with mounting disgust. The final insult, the act of supreme arrogance that sealed humanity's fate, originated from a king named Lycaon of Arcadia. Lycaon was infamous for his impiety, and he resolved to test the omniscience of Zeus, the king of the gods. When Zeus visited him in disguise to observe the state of mortal affairs, Lycaon committed an unspeakable act. He murdered a hostage, or in some versions his own son, and prepared the flesh, serving it to Zeus at a banquet. He intended to ascertain if the god could differentiate between human and animal meat. Zeus was not deceived. His rage was absolute and terrible. He overturned the table, struck Lycaon's palace with a lightning bolt, and as the terrified king fled into the wilderness, he transformed him into a slavering, bloodthirsty wolf. This monstrous act provided the proof Zeus required. Humanity was irredeemably corrupt. A cleansing was imperative. The world had to be washed clean. But even in this age of iron, a flicker of gold remained. There lived a man named Deucalion, the king of Phthia. He was the son of the Titan Prometheus, the very being who had sculpted humanity from clay and had gifted them with fire against the will of Zeus. Like his father, Deucalion was wise and just. His wife Pyrrha was the daughter of the Titans Epimetheus and Pandora, and she too was renowned for her piety. They alone, in all the world, still lived with honor and reverence for the gods. Prometheus, ever the protector of mankind, was aware of Zeus's plan. Chained to his rock in the Caucasus Mountains, he foresaw the coming doom and dispatched a warning to his beloved son. He did not command Deucalion to construct a massive, 7-decked ark like Utnapishtim. The Greek vision of survival was more modest, more human in scale. He simply instructed Deucalion to build a wooden chest, a lanax, and to provision it with all that he and his wife would require, for the end was imminent. Deucalion obeyed without question. Soon after, Zeus unleashed his fury. He amassed the clouds and sent forth a deluge of rain unlike any the world had ever witnessed. But rain alone was insufficient. He called upon his brother Poseidon, the god of the seas. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, unleashing earthquakes and commanding all rivers and streams to burst their banks and rise. The sea itself swelled and surged inland until the distinction between land and ocean was obliterated. The poet Ovid wrote, "All was sea, sea without a shore. Men clung to the highest hilltops only to be swept away. Others sought refuge in boats only to find their oars striking the tops of submerged forests. The wolf swam among the sheep, and the lion was carried out to sea. The world of men, with its cities and its temples, its wickedness and its few virtues, was gone, drowned beneath a silent, universal ocean. For 9 days and 9 nights the chest containing Deucalion and Pyrrha was tossed upon the waves. They were the last remnants of humanity, alone on the face of the waters. On the 10th day the rains finally ceased, and their small vessel came to rest on the muddy twin peaks of Mount Parnassus, the sacred mountain that rose above the sanctuary of Delphi. As the waters slowly receded, the couple stepped out into a world of utter desolation. The silence was profound. The landscape was coated in a thick layer of slime and strewn with the debris of their former world. Their loneliness was absolute. They wept not only for their lost world but for the crushing burden of being its sole inheritors. In their despair they sought divine guidance. They made their way to the ancient shrine of the goddess Themis, the embodiment of divine law and order. The temple was damaged and its altars were cold, but they prayed for a means to restore the human race. The voice of the goddess answered them, but it came in the form of a cryptic riddle. She commanded them, "Depart from my temple, veil your heads, unfasten your robes, and cast behind you the bones of your great mother." Deucalion and Pyrrha were horrified. The command seemed sacrilegious, a desecration of their ancestors' remains. But the wise Deucalion pondered the riddle's hidden meaning. He reasoned that the great mother of all was not a person, but Gaia, the earth itself. And what were the bones of the earth if not the stones scattered across the land? It was a leap of faith and intellect. He explained his interpretation to Pyrrha, and together they veiled their heads and walked away from the temple, gathering stones as they went. With a prayer they began to throw the stones over their shoulders. And then a miracle, the stones began to lose their hardness and rigidity. They started to change shape, to soften and grow, taking on the form and likeness of human beings. The stones that Deucalion threw became men. The stones that Pyrrha threw became women. Thus a new human race was born, a hardier and more resilient people, born from the bones of the earth, fit to endure the toils of a reborn world. This is the Greek memory of the Great Flood. It is a powerful myth, a tale of divine judgment and miraculous rebirth. For centuries it was regarded as simply that, a myth. But what if it were more? What if this story, recounted by poets and playwrights, was the folk memory of a genuine shattering catastrophe that had befallen the ancient Aegean world? What if the sinking of a real civilization triggered the very floods and earthquakes that the myth describes? To explore this, we must shift our focus from the poets to a philosopher, to the great Plato, and to a name that has haunted the imagination of the Western world for more than 2 millennia, Atlantis. In 2 of his celebrated dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, Plato presents a story that he insists is not merely a fable, but a true account of ancient history. The narrative is delivered by the character Critias, who asserts it was passed down through his family from his great-grandfather, who in turn had heard it from one of Greece's most astute thinkers, the statesman Solon. Around 600 BCE, Solon journeyed to Egypt, to the city of Sas. There he conversed with the priests of the goddess Neith, custodians of knowledge extending back into the deepest antiquity. Solon, proud of his own culture, began to recount to the priests the oldest stories of Greece concerning the first man and the great flood of Deucalion and Pyrrha. One of the elderly priests smiled and remarked to him, "O Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you." The priest elucidated that the Greeks possessed no truly ancient memories, because their civilization had been repeatedly annihilated by periodic catastrophes, great deluges of water and conflagrations of fire from the heavens. Each time their written records were destroyed, and they were compelled to restart like children, with no recollection of what came before. The Egyptians, he asserted, residing in a land protected from such disasters, had preserved the records of the entire world. And then the priest revealed a stunning truth. He informed Solon that the story of Deucalion was just one of many such floods, and a relatively recent one at that. He then recounted to Solon the true story of the greatest deed ever accomplished by the Athenians, a story that the Athenians themselves had long since forgotten. 9,000 years before Solon's own era, he declared, Athens had heroically resisted and vanquished a mighty empire that was attempting to conquer the world. That empire had its seat of power on a vast island continent named Atlantis. Plato, through the priest's voice, proceeds to describe Atlantis in astonishing detail. It was an island larger than Libya and Asia combined, situated in the Atlantic Ocean, just beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which is what the Greeks called the Strait of Gibraltar. The island was a paradise, a gift from the sea god, Poseidon himself. It possessed a great fertile plain and a central mountain of incredible beauty. The Atlanteans were masters of engineering. They had constructed a magnificent capital city with concentric rings of land and water, connected by massive canals and bridges. Their temples were adorned with silver and gold. Their palaces featured hot and cold running water from natural springs, and their harbors teemed with ships from across the globe. They possessed a mysterious gleaming metal they called orichalcum, which they prized second only to gold. They commanded a vast army, a fleet of 1,200 warships, and an empire that stretched into Europe and Africa. For many generations, the Atlanteans remained noble and virtuous, for the divine blood of Poseidon flowed robustly in their veins. But as the divine portion of their nature became diluted with mortal admixture over time, they grew corrupt. They became consumed by avarice, greed, and a lust for power. They abandoned their virtue and launched their unjust campaign of world conquest. And then, just as their war with the ancient Athenians reached its climax, the judgment of the gods descended upon them. Plato concludes the story with a chillingly brief and final statement. Zeus, witnessing their wickedness, assembled the gods to pronounce their doom. But afterwards, Plato writes, there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis in like manner was swallowed up by the sea and disappeared. Here then are 2 stories from the ancient Greek world. One is a myth of a great flood that annihilates a wicked human race. leaving only 2 survivors to initiate a new lineage. The other is a philosophical history of a great advanced civilization that is destroyed by a vast flood and earthquakes in a single day and night. Are they separate tales, or are they 2 fractured pieces of the same terrible memory? The story of Deucalion can be interpreted as the folk memory of the survivors on the mainland. It is the simplified, human-scale narrative of the traumatized remnants of a civilization who witnessed the waters rise and believed they were the last people on Earth. The story of Atlantis, preserved by the Egyptians and recounted by Plato, can be seen as the historical account of the cause of that cataclysm, the destruction of a great maritime power, whose sinking would have triggered unimaginable earthquakes and tsunamis across the entire region. Many historians and archaeologists believe the germ of this memory may reside in a real historical event, the colossal volcanic eruption of the island now known as Santorini, sometime around 1600 BCE. At that time, the dominant power in the Aegean was the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete. The Minoans were a remarkably advanced Bronze Age culture, possessing a formidable navy, sophisticated art, and sprawling palace complexes like the one at Knossos. They were in many respects a historical parallel to Plato's Atlantis. The eruption of Thera was one of the most violent geological events in recorded history, and it triggered a series of catastrophic tsunamis that would have utterly devastated the coastal cities and fleets of the Minoan civilization, leading to its swift collapse. Could it be that the memory of this real-life cataclysm, the sudden and violent end of the mighty Minoan world, was the origin of both of these stories? Was the tale of the glorious civilization swallowed by the sea passed down for over 1,000 years until it reached Plato, becoming the legend of Atlantis? And was the memory of the terrifying tsunamis that swept over the Greek mainland preserved in the more personal, mythical tale of Deucalion and Pera? The Greek world, therefore, presents us with a profound development in our mystery. It offers not just another flood, but the ghost of a lost world. The question is no longer simply whether a flood occurred, but what and who was lost beneath the waves. In Mesopotamia, the flood was a solution to a problem. In Greece, it was a punishment for a crime. Now we journey further east, crossing the Indus Valley into the vast subcontinent of India. And here the story of the Great Flood transforms once again. In the ancient Hindu worldview, the Great Flood is not an end to history. It is simply the turning of a page in a book, so vast that it has no beginning and no end. The story commences not with a wicked king or a noisy populace, but with a figure of serene piety. His name is Manu. In the grand tapestry of Hindu cosmology, he is the current progenitor of humanity, an archetypal figure, the father of the human race in our present age. We find him at the dawn of a new day, performing his sacred morning rites on the banks of a river. He is a wise and virtuous king, a rishi whose life is one of devotion, as he cups water from the river to offer as a libation to the sun. A tiny fish, a sapharahi, miraculously swims into his hands. As he is about to release it, the fish speaks to him. Its tiny voice is filled with terror. It implores the wise king for protection. "O gracious one," it pleads, "I am small and I live in fear of the larger fish in this river, who devour the weak. Save me from this great peril." Manu's heart was moved by compassion for the tiny creature. It was a simple act of kindness, an act that would ultimately determine the fate of the entire world. He took the fish and placed it carefully into a small earthen water jar, intending to protect it until it was large enough to fend for itself. But this was no ordinary fish. The very next day it had grown so immense that it filled the entire jar. It spoke again to Manu. "This jar is now too small for me. Please find me a larger dwelling." Manu transferred the fish to a large pot, but by the next morning, it had grown to fill that as well. He then transferred it to a well, then a lake, but each time the fish's supernatural growth continued unabated. It soon filled the entire lake and spoke to Manu once more. "This great lake is no longer sufficient for me. Take me now to the great river, the Ganges, the beloved of the gods." Manu, now realizing he was in the presence of a divine being, carefully carried the fish to the mighty river. But in a short time, even the vast Ganges became restrictive for the colossal creature. Finally, Manu carried the fish to the shore of the great ocean. As he was about to release it into the boundless waters, the fish turned to him, its form now radiant and golden, its size greater than any creature he had ever seen. At that moment it revealed its true identity. It was no mere fish, but Matsya, the first great avatar, the fish incarnation of the supreme god Vishnu, the preserver of the universe. Vishnu then spoke to Manu, not with a plea, but with a prophecy. He revealed that a great cataclysm was imminent. The world was approaching the end of its cosmic age, and a period of universal dissolution, a pralaya, was at hand. In 7 days from now, he told Manu, the 3 worlds, the physical, the astral and the celestial, will all be submerged by a great deluge. All life will be extinguished. But because of your compassion and piety, you have been chosen to be the seed of the new creation that will come after. Vishnu then gave Manu his precise instructions. He was to construct a great ship, and on this ship he was to take not only his own family, but a collection of creatures to repopulate the world. But there was a crucial addition, something that renders the Indian narrative unique. Manu was also instructed to bring aboard the Sapta Rishi, the 7 great sages who were the living repositories of all sacred knowledge and the Vedas. And he was to bring with him the seeds of every plant in the world. Manu's task was not merely to save biological life, it was to preserve the very essence of civilization, both its spiritual wisdom and its physical sustenance, through the coming night of destruction. Vishnu promised that when the flood came, he would return in his form as Matsya to guide them. Manu complied. He built the great ship, and gathered the Sapta Rishi, his family, and the seeds of all life. Just as Matsya had prophesied, on the 7th day, the skies darkened, and the rains began to fall. The 7 great oceans began to overflow their shores, merging into one universal sea. As the waters rose and chaos consumed the world, Manu witnessed the colossal golden fish appear, a single great horn protruding from its head. He tied the cable of his ship to the horn of Matsya, and so through the terrifying churning waters of the cosmic ocean, through a storm that unmade the world, the ship was towed safely, a tiny vessel of hope in an endless expanse of dissolution. The great fish guided them unerringly through the darkness until they reached the highest peak of the Himalayas, which alone remained above the waters. There, the ship was tethered to the mountain, and they awaited the flood to recede. Ocean. After the waters finally subsided, Manu, the sole male survivor, stepped out onto the wet, new earth. He performed a sacred fire ritual, a fonkidneyos, offering clarified butter, milk and curds to the gods to initiate the process of creation anew. From that sacrifice a woman was born. Her name was Ada, or in some tellings, Shraddha. Through her, Manu procreated, and from their union, the human race of our current age was born. Thus, Manu became Manvantara, the progenitor of a new epoch of humanity. If the story concluded there, it would be a powerful and beautiful myth, a worthy counterpart to the tales of Noah and Deucalion. But for the Hindu worldview, the story of Manu's flood is not the main event, it is merely a footnote in a cosmology of such breathtaking scale that it dwarfs all others. The key to understanding this is to recognize that the pralaya, the great flood, is not a singular, unique event. It is a natural, recurring, and absolutely necessary component of the cosmic order. It is the universe breathing out and breathing in. Ancient Hindu texts describe time not as a linear progression, but as a vast repeating cycle of ages, or yugas. This cycle comprises 4 ages, each one a step down in virtue and righteousness from the last. First is the Satya Yuga, a golden age of truth lasting 1,728,000 years, when humanity is enlightened and lives in perfect harmony. Next is the Treta Yuga, the Silver Age, where virtue declines by 1/4. Then comes the Dvapara Yuga, the Bronze Age, where righteousness is diminished by half. Finally, there is our current age, the Kali Yuga, an iron age of darkness, conflict, and spiritual ignorance, which will endure for 432,000 years. These four yugas together form a single great age, a Mahayuga, lasting a total of 4,320,000 years. But even this immense span of time is but a blink of an eye in the true cosmic scale. For 1,000 of these Mahayugas, a span of 4,320,000 years, constitutes just a single day in the life of the creator god Brahma. This period is termed a kalpa. At the conclusion of each kalpa, at the end of each of his days, Brahma enters a state of slumber, and his night is as long as his day. This period of cosmic sleep is the pralaya, the universal dissolution. During Brahma's night, the three worlds are submerged in the waters of the causal ocean. All life forms are dissolved, but their essence, their karma, is preserved in a seed state, held in potential within the divine consciousness of Vishnu, who sleeps upon the cosmic serpent, Shesha. When Brahma awakens to commence his next day, a new kalpa, creation begins anew. The seeds of life are replanted, and the great cycle of yugas starts all over again. The story of Manu's flood is the narrative of one such pralaya. It is the account of the transition between the end of one kalpa and the beginning of another. This implies that this world-ending flood has occurred an uncountable number of times before, and it will occur an uncountable number of times again. Our entire history as a species, every king and every empire, every prophet and every war, all of it is merely a brief drama unfolding in one afternoon of a single day in the life of God. This worldview, this concept of cosmic cycles, is so profound that modern scientists, like the late astronomer Carl Sagan, observed that it is the only one of the world's great ancient faiths to propose a cosmology that even remotely corresponds to the vast timescales of modern scientific cosmology, with its cycles of an expanding and perhaps one day contracting universe. When we examine the Manu myth through this lens, its elements acquire a new, deeper significance. The Ark is no longer merely a lifeboat. It is a genetic and spiritual time capsule, a carefully curated library of the essential data required to reboot civilization after a cosmic reset. Manu is not just a righteous man who got lucky. He is the designated archivist, the steward of the future. The inclusion of the 7 sages is perhaps the most crucial detail. It implies that what is being preserved is not just physical life, but knowledge, wisdom, science, and spirituality. It is a conscious effort to ensure that the highest truths of the previous cycle are not lost, but are carried over to illuminate the next. We have traced the echo of the Great Flood across the Old World, a world connected by ancient pathways of trade, migration, and conquest. It is plausible, one might argue, that these stories traveled along those paths, one culture borrowing and retelling the tale of another. We now journey to the New World, to the continents of the Americas, and here in this supposedly isolated half of the planet, the echo of the Great Flood is not fainter. In many ways it is louder, more varied, and more terrifyingly specific than anywhere else on Earth. The existence of these stories here transforms a historical puzzle into a profound global enigma. Across the length and breadth of the Americas, from the frozen Arctic to the tip of Patagonia, the memory of a world drowned in water is deeply interwoven into the oldest traditions. In the highlands of central Mexico, the Nahua or Aztec, people did not believe in a single creation, but in a sequence of cosmic ages they termed suns. They believed they were currently living in the 5th sun, and that the 4 preceding suns had each been destroyed by a different cataclysm. The 4th sun, they recounted, was the age of water. After thousands of years, the people of that age grew corrupt, the sky fell, and a great flood, a deluge lasting 52 years, covered the entire earth, transforming the people of that era into fish. The story tells of a man named Tata and his wife Nena who were warned by the god Tetlahuan. He instructed them, "Do not concern yourselves with anything more, but hollow out for yourselves a great cypress, and you shall enter it when you see the waters rising to the sky." They complied and survived the deluge, but after the waters receded, they emerged cold and hungry. Spotting a fish, they caught it and kindled a fire to cook it, disobeying the gods' instructions. The smoke from their fire incensed the gods, who descended and punished their disobedience by transforming them into the first dogs. Further south among the Mayan people of the Yucatan, their sacred book, the Popol Vuh Matter Apocalyptic Yucatan, their sacred book, the gods attempted to create humanity multiple times. Their second endeavor resulted in a race of beings sculpted from wood. But these wooden people were a failure. They possessed no hearts, no minds, and no memory of their creators. They wandered the earth aimlessly. And so the gods determined they must be destroyed. The Popol Vuh describes a terrible judgment. A great flood was made, and it came upon the heads of the wood effigies. A heavy resin fell from the sky, the face of the earth was darkened, and a black rain began to fall by day and by night. This flood, combined with assaults from vengeful animals, and even their own household tools, annihilated the wooden people, clearing the way for the creation of true humans from maize. This theme of successive worlds and watery destruction is not confined to Mesoamerica. In the arid mesas of what is now Arizona, the Hopi people recount a similar progression. They believe we are currently living in the fourth world. The third world, they state, was a magnificent civilization that grew corrupt and warlike, forgetting the plan of the Creator. As punishment, the Creator, Sotuk Nang, instructed the righteous few to seek out Spider Grandmother. She guided them to hollow reeds, which they were to seal themselves inside with a small amount of food and water. Then Sotuk Nang destroyed the third world. The legends claim he rained down a terrible flood of water upon it. The whole land was buried under the water, and the waves were as high as mountains. The survivors floated upon the chaotic waters within their reeds, guided by their inner wisdom, until they finally witnessed the land of the fourth world emerge and commenced a new civilization. And the echo reverberates even into the high Andes of South America. The Inca and their predecessors recounted stories of the creator god Viracocha. In one cycle of myths, his first creation was a race of powerful giants, but these giants were unruly and arrogant, and Viracocha resolved to unmake them. He dispatched a great flood, the Unu Pachacuti, a world-reversing cataclysm of water that obliterated the giants from the face of the earth. Afterward, he created a new superior race of humans from stones at the site of Tiwanaku, a man and a woman in a hollowed-out log, a wooden race destroyed by resin and rain, survivors sealed in reeds, giants washed away by a world-reversing flood. The stories are all different, yet they are all the same. They are the memory of a great deluge. For decades, the academic world dismissed these as independent myths, allegories born from local floods, and the universal human imagination. But what if they are not? What if they are the fragmented but persistent memories of a single, real, continent-spanning catastrophe? If so, then the great question becomes, where is the evidence? Where are the ruins of the magnificent third world of the Hopi, or the great civilizations of the fourth sun? To find them, we must look to places that defy all conventional history, to structures that should not exist. Our journey takes us to the desolate Altiplano of Bolivia, a windswept plain nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, one of the most inhospitable environments on the planet. And here we discover the ruins of Pumapunku and its neighboring city, Tiwanaku. What stands at Pumapunku is not merely a ruin, it is an impossibility. Here we find massive blocks of andesite and diorite, some of the hardest stones on Earth, weighing up to 130 tons each. They are cut with such razor-sharp precision and flawless right angles that they appear to have been machined. We observe complex interlocking shapes, like the famous H-blocks, that fit together without mortar in a form of sophisticated prefabricated construction. We discern deep, narrow grooves and small, perfectly circular drill holes, evidence of a technology that seems utterly alien to the ancient world. Orthodox archaeology asserts these structures were built by the Tiwanaku culture with simple stone hammers and bronze chisels, a proposition that becomes patently absurd when one stands before these monolithic, machine-like stones. The mystery deepens when we consider the location itself. Tiwanaku is described by local legends as a city that was built in a single night by giants after a great flood. Geologists have unearthed evidence suggesting the site was once a thriving port, with seashells and marine sediments found far inland. Yet today it rests high above the shores of Lake Titicaca, miles from any significant body of water. Proponents of an alternative history, such as the researcher Graham Hancock, propose a radical theory that Tiwanaku was a great seaport built during the last ice age, when global sea levels were much lower, and that its current altitude is the result of a sudden cataclysmic geological event. The ruins of Pumapunku, which lie scattered and broken as if hurled about by a titan's hand, are cited as evidence of the unimaginable violence of this event, a great flood or tsunami combined with a rapid tectonic uplift of the entire Andean plateau. This pattern of anomalous megalithic architecture is not unique to Pumapunku. Further north in the Peruvian Andes, around the Inca capital of Cusco, we find sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo. Here we observe colossal polygonal stone walls. The stones, some weighing over 100 tons, are of diverse shapes and sizes, yet they are fitted together with a seamless, mortarless precision that defies explanation. The Inca, who were brilliant engineers themselves, constructed their own much cruder stonework directly on top of these impossibly ancient foundations, making it clear that they were not the original builders. They were simply inheritors of a lost, far older legacy. So what could have transpired? What single event could have spawned the universal flood myths across the Americas and simultaneously annihilated these impossibly advanced stone cities? The answer may lie not on the earth but in the sky, and it may have happened precisely at the dividing line between the last ice age and our modern world. A growing number of scientists are now seriously considering a theory known as the Younger Dryas Impact hypothesis. The theory posits that around 12,800 years ago, our planet traversed the debris stream of a disintegrating comet. Multiple large fragments of this comet slammed into the great North American ice sheet, a wall of ice up to 2 miles thick that covered much of the continent. The impacts were cataclysmic. They generated a heat blast that may have ignited a significant portion of the continent, and they triggered a sudden dramatic cooling of the global climate, plunging the world back into near ice age conditions for over 1,000 years, a period known as the Younger Dryas. This event perfectly coincides with the mass extinction of dozens of species of large North American mammals, such as the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed cat. But most importantly, the incredible heat from the impacts would have caused the instantaneous catastrophic melting of a vast portion of the ice sheet. This would have unleashed inland floods of unimaginable scale and power, a torrent of water far greater than all the rivers of the world combined. This deluge would have scoured the continent, carving out landscapes like the channeled scablands of Washington state, and devastatingly increasing global sea levels. Here then is a single scientifically plausible event that accounts for all the evidence. The widespread myths of a great flood, often accompanied by stories of fire from the sky, a prolonged darkness, and a terrible winter, would be the direct traumatized memories of the survivors of the Younger Dryas Impact. The destruction of high-altitude sites like Tiwanaku could be the result of the earthquakes and tsunamis triggered by this cosmic event, and the lost civilization that built these places. They would be the civilization under the ice, or more accurately, the civilization now under the water. They would have been a great maritime culture that flourished during the Ice Age when sea levels were 400 feet lower than they are today, with their cities and ports located on coastlines that are now deep beneath the waves. The Younger Dryas cataclysm would have utterly destroyed their world, submerging their heartlands, and leaving only their remote high-altitude outposts like Pumapunku and Sacsayhuaman as enigmatic testaments to their existence. The echoes from the New World, therefore, present us with a radical and unsettling possibility. They suggest that the history of civilization in the Americas is thousands of years older than we have been taught. The flood myths are not just allegories, they are the fragmented, eyewitness accounts of the violent end of a great chapter in the human story. Our journey following the memory of the Great Flood has revealed a consistent pattern. In the face of divine wrath or cosmic catastrophe, humanity's role is that of the passive survivor. Noah, Utnapishtim, Deucalion, Manu, they are all chosen, warned and instructed to do one thing: build a vessel and seek refuge. They are passengers in a storm, their fate entirely in the hands of a higher power. Their story is one of escape. But as we now turn to the ancient civilization that arose along the Yellow River, the entire narrative is inverted. The Chinese memory of the Great Flood is not a story of escape. It is a story of defiance. It is a saga not about surviving the water, but about conquering it. Here, the heroes do not construct an ark to float above the world. They take up shovels to remake the world itself. The story commences in the legendary golden age of Emperor Yao, a sage king who governed with perfect benevolence and wisdom. But his reign was afflicted by a terrible chronic catastrophe. The ancient texts, such as the classic of history, describe a deluge of almost unimaginable scale and duration. This was not a storm of 40 days. This was a flood that persisted for generations. The waters, it was recounted, assailed the heavens and in their vast expanse, embraced the mountains and overtopped the hills. The world of men was transformed into a boundless, swampy marsh. The populace was driven from their homes into the high mountains, residing in caves and tree nests, constantly menaced by the rising waters and predatory beasts. Faced with this existential crisis, Emperor Yao sought a hero, a minister who could quell the flood. His advisors recommended a man named Gun. Gun was a powerful nobleman, and in some versions of the myth, a descendant of the Yellow Emperor, granting him a semi-divine status. He accepted the monumental task, and for 9 long years he toiled to control the deluge. His method was one of direct confrontation. He attempted to block and dam the floodwaters, to erect barriers that would restrain the seemingly infinite sea. He constructed immense earthen walls and dikes, but no matter how high he built them, the relentless waters would always rise higher, bursting through his defenses and continuing their devastation. In his escalating desperation, Gun committed a fateful act of hubris. He knew that the supreme deity in the heavens possessed a magical substance, a treasure called the Zirang. This was no ordinary soil. It was a divine self-expanding earth that could grow continuously. Gun believed that if he could obtain the Xerang, he could construct dams that would expand endlessly, rising faster than the floodwaters themselves. So he journeyed to the heavens, or in some versions, an enchanted turtle brought it to him, and he stole the magical earth. He utilized it to build his dams, and for a time they seemed effective. The divine soil miraculously expanded to hold back the deluge. But his defiance of the natural order and his theft from the heavens could not ultimately succeed. The power of the flood was too great, a fundamental force that could not be simply blocked. His dams ultimately failed, and the waters raged on. For his failure and for his crime of stealing a divine treasure, the supreme deity was enraged. Gun was captured and publicly executed on the desolate slopes of Feather Mountain. His story, however, did not conclude there. In a display of his divine nature and his unyielding will, his body lay on the mountain for 3 years without decomposing. His spirit refused to depart. His mission to quell the flood left tragically unfulfilled. Finally, a god was sent down from the heavens with a sword to put an end to this strange state of affairs. He slit open Gun's preserved belly, and at that moment, a miracle occurred. A new life sprang forth from the body of the dead hero. It was his son, Yu. As Yu emerged, Gun's body finally transformed, becoming a yellow dragon that plunged into a deep chasm, his spirit at last finding its release. Yu was the inheritor of his father's body, his spirit, and his sacred unfinished task. But he would not replicate his father's mistakes. Yu the Great, as he would come to be known, was a hero of a completely different kind. He examined his father's failed dams and grasped a profound truth: one cannot defeat a flood by standing against it. The only way to triumph is to yield to its power and guide its flow. His was not a philosophy of confrontation, but of redirection. Instead of building walls to halt the water, he would excavate channels to provide it a path. He would collaborate with the force of nature, not oppose it, and so began one of the foundational epics of Chinese civilization. For 13 years, Yu labored to tame the waters. He is not depicted as a distant king commanding his armies, but as a tireless, hands-on engineer. The legends describe him working alongside the common people, his hands calloused, his body caked in mud. He journeyed to the very ends of the known world, surveying the land, charting the courses of rivers, and planning a colossal system of canals. He was a figure of almost superhuman endurance and single-minded focus. The most famous story about him recounts that during his 13 years of labor, he passed by the door of his own home on 3 separate occasions, but never once entered. He heard the cries of his newborn son. He saw his wife waiting, but he understood that if he paused for even a moment of personal comfort, the entire world would continue to suffer. His duty was to the collective, not to himself. Mythical creatures and divine aid came to his side. It was said that a yellow dragon would precede him, dragging its mighty tail across the earth, to indicate to his workers where the great channels should be dug. A giant black turtle would emerge from the water, the magical, X-skinned soil now on its back. But Yu did not use the divine earth for dams as his father had. He utilized it constructively to fortify new riverbanks and create the fertile plains that would become the heartland of Chinese civilization. He carved out immense mountain passes, most famously the Dragon Gate Pass, allowing the pent-up waters of the Yellow River to finally flow freely and harmlessly out to the Great Eastern Sea. After 13 years of relentless toil, he succeeded. The flood waters were guided into their new channels, the land dried out, and the people could finally descend from the mountains to plant their crops in the rich, newly formed river plains. Yu had not just saved the world, he had re-engineered it. He had imposed human order onto natural chaos. This monumental achievement earned Yu a level of prestige and respect that no one had ever known. The reigning Emperor Shun, who had succeeded Yao, recognized that Yu's merit surpassed any other man's. He declared that Yu possessed the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. Emperor Shun abdicated his throne, and Yu the Great became the first emperor of the Xia dynasty, which is traditionally regarded as the first dynasty of China. The very foundation of Chinese political civilization, the concept of the mandate of heaven and the origin of its first ruling house, are therefore inextricably linked to this story of conquering the Great Flood. For thousands of years this was considered a foundational myth, a story about the heroic origins of Chinese culture. But many modern scholars doubted the historical existence of the Xia dynasty, and certainly of a flood of such magnitude. Then, in 2016, a stunning discovery altered everything. A multidisciplinary team of scientists led by geologist Wu Qinglong published a groundbreaking paper in the journal Science. They had found hard geological evidence for a cataclysmic flood that perfectly matched the timeline and location of the ancient legend. Their research revealed that sometime in the distant past, a colossal landslide had occurred in the Jishi Gorge, high up on the Yellow River, on the edge of the Tibetan Plateau. This landslide created a massive natural dam over 600 feet high, blocking the entire flow of one of the world's most powerful rivers. For 6 to 9 months, the water of the Yellow River backed up behind this dam, forming a vast lake. Eventually, the water overtopped the dam, causing it to fail catastrophically. The resulting flood was one of the largest freshwater floods of the entire Holocene epoch, the last 10,000 years of Earth's history. The scientist calculated that a wall of water raging at a rate of 500,000 cubic meters per second would have blasted down the gorge and out onto the plains below. The devastation would have been unimaginable, obliterating any settlement in its path and fundamentally altering the course of the Yellow River for decades, or even centuries, causing chronic, widespread flooding across the low-lying North China Plain. This date is astonishing. It aligns perfectly with the time period of the legendary Shai dynasty and with a major cultural transition in the archaeological record from the Neolithic Longshan culture to the Bronze Age Erlitou culture, which many now believe is the historical site of the Xia. The myth and the science had suddenly dramatically converged. The Great Flood of Emperor Yao was likely not a pure invention. It was the deeply ingrained cultural memory of this single, real and unimaginably massive natural disaster. The story of Yu the Great's 13-year struggle was not about halting a mythical rainstorm. It was the story of a monumental multi-generational engineering project undertaken by the ancient people of the Yellow River Basin to dredge new channels, construct new levees, and manage the chaotic after-effects of the Jishi Gorge outburst flood. They were recovering from a real-world cataclysm. The Chinese narrative, therefore, stands as a unique and powerful pillar in our global investigation. While other cultures gazed skyward and prayed for salvation, the ancestors of the Chinese looked to the earth and grasped their tools. Their hero was not a prophet, but an engineer. Their salvation arose not from a divine promise, but from human perseverance, collective action, and a profound understanding of the natural world. Their foundational story is not one of surviving a world destroyed, but of building a new, more orderly world from the chaos of the old one. It is a testament to a civilization founded on the belief that humanity's greatest power lies in its own ingenuity and its indomitable will to conquer any challenge, even a flood that threatened to touch the heavens. We have journeyed across the globe. We have amassed the testimonies, the eyewitness accounts of a universal catastrophe preserved for millennia in the amber of myth and legend. But stories, no matter how potent or persistent, can only take us so far. We must inquire if this universal memory is anchored to a physical event, a geological reality. Is there a single scientifically verifiable cataclysm that could leave behind not just a legacy of stories, but a tangible scar upon the very face of the planet? The science of our time offers two powerful and profoundly different candidates. One is the story of a raging sea in a specific corner of the world. The other is the story of fire from the sky that engulfed the entire globe. Our first investigation leads us to the Black Sea. In the 1990s, two highly respected marine geologists from Columbia University, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, were examining sediment cores and sonar mappings of the Black Sea floor. It was an enormous isolated freshwater lake. Its surface lay more than 400 feet below the level of the Mediterranean Sea. A natural dam of rock and earth at what is now the Bosphorus Strait in Turkey held the salt water of the Mediterranean at bay. On the fertile exposed plains surrounding this freshwater lake, some of the very first Neolithic farmers in Europe had settled, living in a kind of agricultural paradise. But the world was warming. The great ice sheets that had covered much of Europe and North America were melting, and their meltwater was pouring into the world's oceans, causing global sea levels to rise relentlessly. Year after year, the level of the Mediterranean Sea crept higher, pressing against the Bosphorus Dam. The pressure mounted until one fateful day, the breaking point was reached. According to Ryan and Pittman's theory, the dam breached, a small trickle of salt water transformed into a raging torrent. The rock and earth were torn away, and a waterfall of cataclysmic proportions was born. They calculated that the volume of water pouring through the breached dam was 200 times greater than that of Niagara Falls. Every single day, 10 cubic miles of salt water cascaded from the Mediterranean into the low-lying Black Sea basin. The sound would have been a deafening, continuous roar, audible for hundreds of miles. A plume of dense, deadening salt water would have plunged into the freshwater lake, obliterating its ecosystem and rendering the waters anoxic and lifeless from the bottom up. For the people inhabiting the fertile plains around the lake, the world would have ended with terrifying speed. Ryan and Pittman calculated that the water level in the basin rose by at least 6 inches every single day. The shoreline was not creeping inward, it was advancing. In the flatter northern areas, the sea would have swallowed up nearly a mile of land with every sunrise. Villages would have been submerged in a matter of hours. The world that these people had known for countless generations was being violently, inexorably erased. There was no resisting it. The only recourse was flight. An entire population was displaced, sent radiating outwards in a desperate exodus. They fled west into the Balkans, north into the steppes of Russia, and south and east into Anatolia and Mesopotamia. And as they fled, Ryan and Pittman contend, they carried with them the terrifying, indelible memory of their world being swallowed by the sea. This powerful, traumatic story, transmitted from generation to generation, would have become a foundational legend. It is this event, they propose, that formed the historical seed of the Mesopotamian flood myths, the stories of Atrahasis and Utnapishtim, and by cultural transmission, the biblical story of Noah. It was a real flood in the correct part of the world that could explain the origin of our most famous flood legends. The evidence they collected, from sonar images of the ancient, drowned shoreline to the distinct layers of freshwater and saltwater mollusk shells in the sediment cores, makes a compelling case. While scientific debate persists regarding whether the flood was this rapid or a more gradual process, the Black Sea deluge hypothesis remains a potent candidate for a real event underlying the myth. However, it has one significant limitation. A flood in the Black Sea, no matter how catastrophic, cannot explain the existence of a virtually identical story among the Hopi in Arizona, or the Inca in Peru, or the ancient Chinese along the Yellow River. To explain a truly global pattern of myths, we require a truly global catastrophe. And for that, our second scientific theory takes us further back in time to a far more violent and wide-reaching event. A cataclysm that began with fire from the sky. A declysm that began with fire from the sky. Our story now centers on a bizarre and mysterious period in Earth's recent geological past known as the Younger Dryas. As the last ice age was drawing to a close, around 14,000 years ago, the planet was steadily warming. The great ice sheets were in full retreat. Then, abruptly, around 12,800 years ago, something slammed on the brakes. The warming trend suddenly reversed, and for the next 1,300 years, the planet plunged back into a period of deep cold and glacial expansion. For decades, the cause of this dramatic climate U-turn remained one of the greatest puzzles in paleoclimatology. Then in 2007, a team of more than 24 scientists led by figures like geophysicist Alan West and oceanographer James Kennett proposed a radical and terrifying explanation. They argued that the Younger Dryas was triggered by a cosmic impact. Their hypothesis states that a large disintegrating comet, perhaps several kilometers in diameter, passed through the inner solar system, and that multiple fragments of this comet struck the Earth. The epicenter of the impacts, they proposed, was the 2-mile-thick Laurentide ice sheet that covered North America at the time. This was an extraordinary claim, and it demanded extraordinary evidence. Over the past decade and a half, the proponents of this theory have assembled multiple independent lines of evidence from all over the world, which they argue are the unmistakable fingerprints of a cosmic catastrophe. The first is a geological feature known as the black mat, at archaeological and geological sites across North America, and now discovered on other continents as well. There exists a thin, dark layer of sediment rich in carbon. It is like a line drawn in the earth. Below this line, dated precisely to 12,800 years ago, the fossil record is replete with the remains of the great Ice Age megafauna, woolly mammoths, mastodons, dire wolves, and saber-toothed cats, alongside the stone tools of the Clovis people, the first widespread human culture of North America. Directly above this black line, they are all gone. The mammoths, the Clovis people, and dozens of other species vanish completely from the fossil record, all at the same geological instant. The black mat serves as a tombstone for a lost world. Within this geological tombstone, scientists have found the chemical signatures of an extraterrestrial impact. They have discovered nanodiamonds, microscopic diamonds formed under the extreme pressure and heat generated by a cosmic collision. They have found melt glass and tiny magnetic spherules, droplets of earth and rock that were vaporized in the impact, blasted into the atmosphere, and then rained back down across the continent. They have found elevated levels of iridium and, most tellingly, a significant platinum spike in sediment layers all over the world, including in the Greenland ice cores. Platinum is rare in Earth's crust, but abundant in comets and asteroids. This platinum layer acts as a global, undeniable time marker for a massive influx of extraterrestrial material right at the onset of the Younger Dryas. The evidence also points to continent-wide biomass-burning vast wildfires that would have consumed North America and parts of Europe in the wake of the impact's heat blast. Here, then, is a scientifically documented event of almost unimaginable violence. A true global cataclysm that coincides perfectly with one of the most significant extinction events of the last 65 million years. But how does it connect to the Great Flood? The connection lies in the target of the impact, the Laurentide ice sheet. Hitting a 2-mile thick sheet of ice with multiple cosmic projectiles traveling at tens of thousands of miles per hour would not just crack it, it would vaporize and flash melt a truly staggering volume of water. This would have triggered two distinct types of floods, both on a scale that dwarfs anything in recorded human history. First, it would have unleashed continental megafloods, torrents of fresh water pouring off the melting ice sheet, with such force that they scoured entire landscapes down to the bedrock, creating features like the channeled scablands in the northwestern United States. But second, and more importantly for our global story, this immense pulse of meltwater would have poured into the Atlantic and Arctic oceans, triggering a sudden, rapid, and catastrophic rise in global sea levels. Every coastline on every continent on Earth would have been inundated simultaneously. Low-lying plains and coastal river valleys, the very places where human populations have always concentrated, would have been swallowed by the sea. The Younger Dryas Impact hypothesis provides a single terrifying mechanism that can account for nearly all the elements of the universal myth. It provides the fire from the sky, the prolonged darkness from the atmospheric dust, the years of cold from the impact winter, and most crucially a genuine, truly global flood. It would not have been a flood from 40 days of rain, but a flood from the sea itself, rising up to reclaim the land. The stories of a flood that came with a great noise, that was accompanied by cosmic upheaval, and that wiped out a previous age of giants, both human and animal, suddenly appear less like myths and more like the rational testimony of the traumatized survivors of a cosmic impact. But this only deepens the mystery, for it compels us to ask a far more profound and unsettling question. Who or what was the victim? The conventional timeline of history provides a simple answer. The victims were scattered, small, disconnected bands of Stone Age hunter-gatherers. The world before that cataclysm, we are told, was a primitive one, devoid of cities, of agriculture, of complex society. But if that is true, why would such a people living simple lives have created a universal and eternally enduring myth about the end of the world? What if the orthodox timeline is not just incomplete, but is fundamentally wrong? What if the great flood myths are not simply the frightened stories of primitive peoples, but the traumatized, fragmented memories of a sophisticated world that was utterly and completely erased? This is the entry point into a theory so profound it reframes the entire story of humanity. It is the theory of a lost global civilization, a mother culture that was wiped from the face of the earth in that great cataclysm. This is not a conspiracy of secret societies or hidden cabals. It is, as some researchers argue, a conspiracy of orthodox thinking, a collective refusal by mainstream academia to examine a growing mountain of evidence that contradicts our most cherished beliefs about the origins of civilization. The theory suggests we are a species with amnesia, and the flood myths are the terrifying nightmares that haunt our collective, forgotten past. To find evidence for this lost world, we cannot seek it where we would expect. Its great cities and heartlands, which would have been situated on the fertile coastal plains of the Ice Age, now lie submerged beneath 400 feet of water, lost to the great sea level rise caused by the cataclysm. What remains are the ghosts, the scattered fingerprints of this mother culture found in the most unexpected places. The first fingerprint is found in Egypt, at the Giza Plateau, but our attention is not on the pyramids, it is on the Great Sphinx. For over a century, Egyptology has confidently dated the Sphinx to the reign of the pharaoh Khafre, around 2500 BCE. This dating is based not on any inscription, but on context and stylistic assumptions. However, in the 1990s, a geologist from Boston University named Dr. Robert Schoch presented evidence that threatened to rewrite history. He pointed out that the severe erosion on the body of the Sphinx, and more importantly on the walls of the enclosure from which it was carved, is not horizontal, which would be characteristic of wind and sand erosion. Instead, the erosion features are deep, vertical fissures, a classic pattern caused by thousands of years of heavy rainfall running down the rock face. The problem is that the Sahara Desert has been as arid as it is today for the last 5,000 years. For the Sphinx to have been eroded by that much rain, Schoch concluded, it must be thousands of years older than its official age. It must date back to a much earlier, wetter period in Egypt's history, a period that ended sometime before 700 BCE, and perhaps began much earlier. This geological evidence suggests the Sphinx is a lonely sentinel gazing out from a time so remote it predates the known Egyptian civilization by millennia. The second, and perhaps most powerful fingerprint, was unearthed in southern Turkey. It is a site called Göbekli Tepe. What has been excavated there has shattered all conventional models of the past. It is a complex of massive megalithic stone circles. The pillars are T-shaped, standing up to 20 feet tall and weighing up to 20 tons, and they are covered in exquisitely carved reliefs of animals like lions, boars, foxes, and strange abstract human figures. It is, by any definition, a highly sophisticated and complex temple complex, and its age is simply staggering. Carbon dating has confirmed that Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, but its construction began far earlier, at least as early as 9600 BCE, that is 11,600 years ago, a date that places it directly at the end of the Younger Dryas Cold period. This means that this vast complex cathedral was built 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the first pyramids, and long before the supposed invention of agriculture, pottery, metallurgy, or writing. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were, according to our history books, supposed to be primitive, small-scale hunter-gatherers, yet they quarried, transported, and intricately carved hundreds of multi-ton stone pillars and organized them into a complex with clear astronomical significance. How is this possible? Proponents of the lost civilization theory argue that it is not. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not primitive. They were the survivors. They were the inheritors of a much older and more sophisticated tradition, desperately attempting to construct a monument to their lost knowledge in the aftermath of the global cataclysm. The third fingerprint is a global pattern of impossible megalithic architecture. We have already observed the machine-like precision of Puma Punku and the seamless polygonal walls of Sacsayhuaman in the Andes. But this strange shared building style is found all over the world. We see it in the megalithic temples of Malta, in the colossal stone foundations of the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek in Lebanon, and in the Osirian Temple in Abydos, Egypt, which is constructed in a style so different from the other temples that many believe it to be far older. All of these sites share the same enigmatic features, the use of multi-ton blocks of stone, a precision of construction that seems to defy the known tools of the age, and a complete absence of any inscription from the builders to tell us who they were or how they accomplished it. Later known civilizations, like the Romans at Baalbek or the dynastic Egyptians at Abydos, simply erected their own cruder structures on top of these ancient impossible foundations. Is it plausible that dozens of disconnected, primitive cultures all independently invented and then forgot the same impossibly advanced style of stone masonry? Or is it more logical that these are the scattered outposts of a single global mother culture, a civilization that had mastered the science of construction? The fourth fingerprint is perhaps the most bizarre. It is found on a series of maps, the most famous of which is the Piri-Reis map of 1513. This map, drawn by a Turkish admiral, is remarkable because it depicts the coastlines of South America and Africa with a degree of accuracy and longitude that should have been impossible for European cartographers of that era. But the most stunning feature is what it appears to show at the bottom, the northern coast of Antarctica. Even more controversially, it seems to depict that coastline as it would appear without its massive ice cap. The late Professor Charles Hapgood, in his famous study of this and other ancient maps, argued that the only explanation is that Piri Reis and other map makers of his time were copying from much older source maps that had been passed down and preserved for thousands of years. In order to have mapped the coast of Antarctica before it was covered by ice, that source map would have had to have been drawn in the deepest antiquity at least 6,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier during the last ice age. This implies the existence of a highly advanced global maritime civilization with the technology to accurately map the entire planet long before the age of European exploration. When we consider all these fingerprints, the impossibly old Sphinx and Göbekli Tepe, the global pattern of megalithic architecture, and the out-of-place ancient maps, and overlay them with the scientific reality of the Younger Dryas cataclysm, a new and stunning narrative of our past begins to emerge. The story is this. During the last ice age, a great civilization flourished. It was not a land-based continental empire, but a maritime one. Its great cities and ports were situated on the vast coastal plains exposed by the lower sea levels of that epoch. They were masters of the sea, and they traversed the entire globe, leaving their architectural calling cards in high-altitude locations like the Andes, and on stable continental plates like the Giza Plateau, leaving their architectural calling cards in high-altitude locations like the Andes. They possessed a sophisticated, science-based knowledge of engineering, astronomy, and cartography. Then 12,800 years ago, the comet struck. The cataclysm was absolute. The impacts, the firestorms, and the ensuing megafloods completely obliterated their world. Their coastal heartlands were violently submerged by the rapid sea level rise, erased from history and hidden beneath the waves. The event was so traumatic, so utterly destructive, that civilization was effectively reset to zero. But a few survived, scattered and broken. These inheritors of the lost world became the wandering sages and civilizing heroes, whose memory is preserved in myths all over the world. Figures like Viracocha in the Andes, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, or Osiris in Egypt. These figures were said to have arrived after a great flood, bringing with them the gifts of law, agriculture, and civilization to the primitive, traumatized survivors who were scattered across the land. They constructed final enigmatic structures like Göbekli Tepe, not as dwellings but as time capsules, encoding their sophisticated astronomical knowledge of cycles, like the precession of the equinoxes, a final message to a future that might eventually understand. Over the next 6,000 years, the memory of this mother culture faded into the twilight of myth. The knowledge they passed on was diluted and distorted, and the cataclysm that destroyed them, the single most dramatic event in human history, was remembered only as a story told to children, the story of a great flood. Orthodox history, commencing its clock with the rise of Sumer and Egypt around 3000 BCE, picks up the narrative only after thousands of years of painful, slow recovery, completely missing the enormous lost chapter that came before. This theory, while controversial, provides a single unified framework that can explain all of the anomalies we have encountered. It accounts for the universal myths, the impossible ancient structures, the out-of-place maps, and the sophisticated astronomical knowledge found in the world's oldest traditions. It suggests we are a species with a profound and tragic case of amnesia, and it reframes the Great Flood as the single most important story ever told, because it is not just a tale of a natural disaster. It is the story of the day our civilization was wiped from the earth, and the day we forgot who we truly were. We have arrived at the precipice of our inquiry, the final and most profound question that underpins this entire global mystery. We possess a cataclysm. The scientific evidence for the Younger Dryas Impact provides a plausible agent of global destruction, And we have a victim: the speculative but compelling theory of a lost advanced maritime civilization that was wiped from the earth in that catastrophe. But every one of the ancient stories from every corner of the world contains a third crucial element. It is the element that bridges the gap between destruction and survival. In every story there is an agent of salvation, a being or a group of beings who possess foreknowledge of the coming doom and who intervene to save a chosen remnant of humanity. The myths bestow upon these beings a simple name: the gods. Yet our journey through science and lost history compels us to ask the great question: who or what were they really? Let us begin with the most grounded speculation. Let us envision the scenario outlined by the theory of the lost civilization. A great global culture flourishes during the Ice Age. They have mastered navigation, engineering, and astronomy. Then the cataclysm strikes. Their world is annihilated in a chaos of fire, earthquakes, and flood. But a few survive. Perhaps they were in high-altitude colonies like those in the Andes. Perhaps they were on the open sea in their great ships when the disaster struck. These survivors, possessing the knowledge and perhaps some of the technology of their drowned world, find themselves on a radically changed and broken planet, populated by scattered, terrified, and far more primitive hunter-gatherer societies who also endured the event. Now place yourself in the mind of one of those hunter-gatherers. After years of darkness, cold, and terror, a group of strangers arrives at your shore. They come on a vessel unlike anything you have ever seen. They are dressed in strange attire. They may even look physically different. They bring with them the secrets of agriculture, teaching you how to plant seeds to create a predictable food supply. They possess a deep understanding of the stars, showing you how to track the seasons and predict celestial events. They know how to quarry and move colossal stones, creating structures that seem to rise from the earth as if by magic. They carry the knowledge of laws of medicine, of mathematics. How would you describe these beings to your children? And how would your children describe them to theirs? You would not call them very clever humans from a drowned continent. You would have no frame of reference for such a concept. You would employ the only word that could possibly encompass their power and wisdom. You would call them gods. Viewed through this lens, the entire cast of divine characters in the flood myths is radically transformed. They are no longer supernatural beings from another dimension. They are the mythologized memory of the last members of a lost human civilization. Consider the Mesopotamian god Enki, or Ea, who repeatedly defies the will of the other gods to save humanity. Is this a tale of divine politics on a heavenly plane? Or is it the distorted memory of a very human debate that took place among the leaders of the surviving faction of the mother culture? Perhaps the faction represented by the god Enlil, witnessing the utter devastation of the world and the collapse of their civilization, argued for a policy of non-intervention. They may have believed that the more primitive surviving populations were a lost cause, and that they should cut their losses and preserve their knowledge in isolation. The Enki faction, however, may have argued for intervention, for seeking out the most promising survivors, the exceedingly wise Atrahasis or the righteous Utnapishtim, and providing them with the tools and knowledge needed to rebuild. The strange story of Enki whispering the warning through a reed wall could be the folk memory of this faction employing some form of technology, perhaps a long-range communication device, to contact their chosen survivor covertly without alerting the rival isolationist faction. Consider Prometheus of the Greek myths. He is a titan, a member of an older order of gods who explicitly defies the new chief god Zeus to bestow upon humanity the fire of knowledge and skill. He is punished for being a friend to mortals. This story maps perfectly onto the template of a civilizing hero from a vanquished older culture transmitting forbidden knowledge to a younger one. The great war between the Titans and the Olympians, which precedes the flood myth in Greek cosmology, could itself be the mythologized memory of a terrible civil war within the mother culture, a conflict that perhaps weakened them and left them vulnerable to the coming cosmic cataclysm. The memory of these gods is often directly linked to their appearance and their point of origin. The Indian creator god Viracocha and the Mesoamerican god Quetzalcoatl were both famously described in legends as being different from the indigenous people. They were often depicted as being tall, bearded and fair-skinned, and their legends explicitly state that they arrived from the sea in a time of chaos, after a great flood. They taught the people the arts of civilization, and after their work was complete, they departed, promising one day to return. This is not the description of a supernatural spirit. It is a startlingly precise description of a foreign human being, a mariner, a teacher, a survivor from a different land and a different ethnic group, arriving with the remnants of his culture's knowledge. The promise of their return is the desperate hope of a traumatized people that more of these wise teachers, these bringers of order, might still exist somewhere. This single idea that the gods were simply advanced humans from a lost civilization provides a powerful, rational framework for understanding the core of the flood myths. But there is one final layer to this mystery, one last speculative leap that takes us from the realm of a lost human history into something far stranger. It compels us to ask the question, where did the mother culture acquire its knowledge? How did a civilization during the Ice Age achieve a level of scientific understanding that in some areas appears to have rivaled our own? To explore this, we must consider a documented, real-world phenomenon known as the cargo cult. During the Second World War in the Pacific, isolated tribal populations on remote islands experienced their first contact with advanced industrial civilization. They witnessed giant metal birds, airplanes descend from the sky bearing incredible riches, or cargo, canned food, steel tools, clothing, and medicine. The men who accompanied these birds, the soldiers and airmen, possessed astonishing technologies like radios and firearms. After the war concluded and the soldiers departed, the islanders desperately yearned for the cargo to return. Believing the rituals they had observed were the cause of the cargo's arrival, they began to practice a form of sympathetic magic. They carved giant headphones from wood and sat in makeshift radio shacks. They constructed life-sized replicas of airplanes from straw and bamboo, and they cleared landing strips in the jungle, illuminating them with torches at night, forever awaiting the return of the cargo-bearing gods. They were perfectly rational human beings interpreting a phenomenon so far beyond their technological and cultural context that it could only be understood as divine. Now let us apply this cargo cult analogy to the deepest antiquity. What if our lost mother culture was itself a cargo cult? What if their sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering was not something they developed entirely on their own, but was an inheritance, a partial and perhaps imperfectly understood legacy from an encounter with a technology and an intelligence so far beyond their own that it could only be interpreted as divine? This is the ultimate speculation. The beings who possessed foreknowledge of a cosmic cataclysm like an impending comet impact were not just clever astronomers, but beings with the capacity to monitor the solar system. The warning to construct a vessel and preserve the seed of all life might not have been merely a command, but a form of biological and cultural preservation project, an attempt by a superior intelligence to safeguard the genetic and intellectual diversity of a planet they were observing. The dark Mesopotamian myth of humanity being created as a slave race and then exterminated for being too noisy suddenly acquires a much more literal and terrifying tone. Were we an experiment that had gone awry? Was the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas a natural event that these beings attempted to help us survive? Or was the cataclysm itself an artificial act, a deliberately induced factory recall, with a few scientists like Enki trying to save a part of the experiment in defiance of a larger protocol? We cannot know the answer. But whether we choose to perceive the gods as the last heroic humans of a drowned world, or as a mysterious non-human intelligence from an unknown source, the conclusion remains the same. The ancient stories are not what they appear to be. They are not simple fables about the supernatural. They are the profoundly distorted, misunderstood, and mythologized records of a real history, a history of a great power differential. They are the memory of the encounter between those who possessed almost unimaginable knowledge and those who had lost almost everything. The figures who warned of the flood, who guided the arks, and who replanted the seeds of civilization in a broken world, were the keepers of a sacred flame of knowledge. The great flood myths, in all their global haunting consistency, are our last and most precious connection to that flame. And the greatest question is not simply who they were, but what it was they knew that we, their distant descendants, have now so utterly and completely forgotten. We are left with a convergence of evidence that is, frankly, staggering. It is not just that we have hundreds of myths, it is that the myths, the anomalous archaeology, and the hard geological and climatological data all seem to point toward the same dark window of time, that chaotic and violent transition at the end of the Ice Age between roughly 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. The stories and the science seem to be conveying the same message. Something terrible happened. The great mystery is no longer if a world-altering catastrophe occurred. The evidence for that is now overwhelming. The question is how we choose to interpret the human story that is woven into it. The first is the path of psychology. Through this door, the Great Flood is a profound archetype, a story that resides in the collective unconscious of our species. Humanity was born in the shadow of the Great Ice Age, a time of dramatic climate shifts and rising seas. We have always lived by the water, and we have always feared its power. The flood story is a universal metaphor for the chaos that lies just beyond the walls of our orderly lives, and the ark is the symbol of the fragile vessel of consciousness that carries us through the darkness. The stories are so similar across the world because human minds and human fears are fundamentally the same. The myth is a deep psychological truth, but not a literal historical one. The second door is that of geological memory. Through this door, the myths are not metaphors. They are history, albeit a history that has been shattered and distorted by the trauma of the event itself. The story of the flood is a form of transgenerational PTSD, a warning passed down in the most durable format humanity has ever invented. The myth, the Younger Dryas Impact, or another catastrophe of that era, was so violent and so total that it became the defining event for its survivors. They encoded the memory of the fire, the darkness, and the rising waters into their stories, ensuring that their descendants would never forget the fragility of the world. In this view, the myths are the human testimony of a genuine geological trauma. And the third door is the most radical. It is the door of lost history. Through this door, the myths are more than just the memory of a natural disaster. They are the fragmented, coded chronicles of a lost civilization. The flood is the memory of the event that destroyed them. But the details of the stories, the warning from a wise figure, the vessel that preserves the seeds of life and knowledge, the arrival of civilizing heroes after the waters recede, these are the details of the people themselves. This view suggests that we are a species with amnesia, that the true history of our own intelligence and sophistication on this planet is far older and grander than we know. The myths are not just a warning, they are the last tattered pages of a lost chapter of our own autobiography. And so we are left here in the quiet of the present moment, with these echoes from the deepest antiquity, a psychological truth, a geological memory, or a forgotten history. Perhaps the answer is a complex tapestry woven from all three. We may never know for certain. The people who lived through that time are gone. Their world is gone, buried beneath thousands of years of silt and sediment or submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water. All we have left are these whispers. What they ask of us is not belief but attention. They ask us to consider the possibility that the world is much older, more mysterious, and more cyclical than we imagine. They ask us to be humble in the face of nature's power and to recognize the fragility of the complex, interconnected world we have built. They remind us that the line between order and chaos can be erased in a geological instant. As you close your eyes tonight and the world outside grows quiet, listen. Listen past the sounds of your home, past the sounds of the sleeping city. Listen to the quiet, steady rhythm of your own breathing, the gentle tide of life that resides within you. This is the oldest rhythm there is. And perhaps if you listen closely enough, in that deep stillness between one breath and the next, you might just hear it, a faint, distant and ancient sound, like the whisper of rain on a forgotten ocean. It is the story of our ancestors, and it is a part of you. What is it trying to tell you?